Hi guys, here is John. He is 25 and at the start of 2020 he worked as a chef in Brisbane. This is Dave, he's 58 and in the start of 2020 he worked as a FIFO or fly-in fly-out mechanic. This is Albert, he is 74 and in the start of 2020 he was happily retired. So John was having a great life in Brisbane in early 2020. He was enjoying every minute of it. He was engaged to be married and he was saving up for his very first house. He was so close to having the deposit that he needed for a house, and he and his partner were making plans to start a family together. Everything was perfect for the pair of them and there was so much hope for the future. In early 2020, Dave was working 2 on 2 off in the gas fields in Queensland. He was doing quite well for himself and already had his own home which was mortgage free, as well as 3 rental properties around Brisbane that were all in various stages of being paid off. Also in early 2020, Albert was and is happily retired after working 40 years as a policeman. He's on an extremely good pension and he owns his own home and 2 rentals, all of which are mortgage free. So then, as we all know, COVID came. The Australian government forced lockdowns and Brisbane CBD essentially turned into a ghost town overnight. Now these lockdowns meant that young John lost his job. Now John understood what was happening and was willing to make the sacrifice if it meant that older people like Albert were not put at more risk than they had to be. So this sacrifice that John was making, he saw as a way of protecting the weakest in society. But here's the kicker. John locked down to save the medically weakest, but absolutely not the financially weakest. Out of this small group, John was definitely the financially weakest. And as he would find out later on, nobody cared about that. During lockdowns, Dave was still able to go to work as he was regarded as an essential worker, effectively keeping the gas on. On his time off, he was unable to spend on holidays or meals out. So he started saving and saving and saving. He built up a serious amount of cash. And during lockdowns, Albert also started up building more and more savings, as he could not go on the month-long cruise that he goes on each year and he didn't know what to do with all his money. The savings the pair of them had built up became a bit of an issue because the useless RBA governor, Philip Lowe, had slashed rates to near zero and had said that he would not raise rates again until 2024. Do you remember that? This was bad news for Dave and Albert, as they were getting no interest on their term deposits. They wanted their money to be working for them, so what did they decide to do with it? Well, unfortunately for young John, you know, the guy who basically sacrificed his life to save Albert and people like Albert, he was about to be completely thrown under the bus by the very people he was trying to save. Both Albert and Dave decided to buy more property, so they could get more tenants in who will start giving them money in rent, which would make up for the interest they were losing in term deposits. They didn't care that this action was pushing up house prices to the moon, which is exactly what happened. They didn't care that their actions were basically crushing any hopes that John had of buying his own home and starting a family. No, that was not important to either Dave or Albert. John's sacrifice meant nothing to them. And to add salt into the wound, John had started eating into his savings due to being out of work, and this was making his chances of being able to afford a deposit further and further away, especially when you take into account the house price rises. And to add even more salt into the wound, John's rent started shooting up. This was due to a few things. There were a lot of people escaping the disaster that was Melbourne with its relentless lockdowns, and there were people moving up from Sydney to take advantage of working from home opportunities and lower house prices. There was so much demand being pushed into a small supply, and this created a landlord feeding frenzy where they all wanted to squeeze more and more and more out of the trapped tenants. And all of these tenants were completely trapped at this point. They had no way of moving on to the next level, as in buying a house. So there had been an enormous divide created where you had before COVID and then after COVID. People who owned a home or homes before COVID became a different class of citizen. They were the chosen ones. Whereas the people who did not own a home before COVID were now the dregs of society. The people who could never buy a home for eternity, whose only reason for existence was now just to be fed on by the parasitic landlord class. And this divide was all man-made. The government created it. It wasn't COVID that created it. It was the government's actions that created it. They chose the winners and they chose the losers. In 2022, Philip Lowe, the worst RBA governor that there's ever been, started raising rates. Now, he should never have dropped them so low in the first place. All he did was created insane inflation everywhere. And then in 2022, a further nail was about to penetrate John's heart. Albo was voted in. Now, young John was initially extremely happy about this, as Labour supposedly cared about the insane inequality that has been created by Morrison, Frydenberg and Lowe. Albo was going to do something about the crazy rent and house price increases he had to. And my God, did he ever. The lunatic property investor decided to add fuel to the fire and threw open the borders to the world at the exact time that the doors should be kept closed to the world. How else was housing ever going to catch up? Though Dave and Albert could not believe their luck. They were already making an absolute fortune in rents, and the money that they were making was beyond their wildest dreams. Never did they think that a Labour Party getting in would make them so rich. They remember with fear when Bill Shorten tried to get rid of negative gearing, and they made sure he was never voted in, and naively they thought that Albo might be like him. But they needn't have worried. They had a leader in Albo who was going to do everything in his power to increase the demand on rentals and pump house and rent prices to the moon. They are still going up all over the country in the second half of 2025. When the vacancy rates are at these historically low levels across the board, then this tragedy is not going to end. Albo doesn't care though. He's made millions out of property. He doesn't care what effect his actions have had on young John and the millions like young John. He doesn't care that John sacrificed everything to do the right thing, only to be kicked to the curb by the very people he saved. And John really has lost everything, guys. He could not get his job back and found it impossible to get another job, as so many new chefs have been shipped in from all over the world, and they were willing to work for much less than John. And this meant John could no longer afford his ever increasing rent, and he was thrown out with his partner. They spent some time at a friend's house, but that soon became impossible as there was just not enough room. All John could end up doing is buying a tent and setting up camp in Musgrave Park with the rest of the homeless people. You know, all the other people pushed over the edge by Anthony Albanese and his treacherous policies. Now, John and his partner still live in the park. They watched as Albo got voted back in and knew that their life was not going to get any easier. Obviously, they were glad Dutton did not get in, because he would have made their lives much worse. With Albo, at least they may be able to stay in their tent in the park. And that is about as far as their ambition in life goes now. It's basically over before it was allowed to start, and all because they were just not able to buy that first house in time. What a country Australia's become, seriously. But at least Dave and Albert are still doing fine. Well, much more than fine, really. They're pulling in so much in rent now that Dave has packed his job in, and Albert goes on 6-month cruises around the world now. Each of their properties have gone up at least $500,000 each. Never in their wildest dreams did they think that they would ever become so rich. But that's what you get when you get successive landlord leaders, I suppose. Nothing else matters except for the Ponzi. Everything else and everybody else who is not a player in the Ponzi gets decimated. And for anyone like young John out there, I am sorry for what the government has done to you. I would like to say that it will get better, but if Australia keeps voting for the uni party, then it is never ever going to get any better than this. They've proven that. So yeah, guys, if you know anyone like John, then please share this video with them, so they know that some people still remember the sacrifices they made and what was done to them. And maybe even consider giving me a like and subscribe yourselves. And cheers for that. See you in the next one.